All right, guys, we're gonna get going now. Just one reminder before we get into class is we're gonna be setting up mentorship groups today, or not today, but this week. So if you're interested, please make sure you filled out the form. I think it's on a few of our ed posts.
There's a announcement link. Sorry, the link is in the announcement for the week two announcements. If you go to the bottom, it'll be there, so you can have a look at that.
So today we'll be looking into, the first section of navigation in apps. So, but before we get to that, we're just going to review some UI kit stuff just to make sure you guys are ready for today's lecture. So, how do you center a view in the center of the screen? We're not doing a Kahoot today because I didn't have time to make one, but if someone could just raise their hand or yell out what they think. Sure.
A and C.
A and C. Yeah, I agree with that. You could also do it with a leading anchor as long as you do a trailing anchor as well. But yeah, the correct answer is E, A, and C. Yeah.
Is there a diagram available online with all the different methods that like my view has or CenterX Anchor has? Because I've just been doing dot and I've been reading it, but it would be really helpful to some sort of unless you guys know.
Yeah, so I think on my lecture on Wednesday there was an image for that.
Okay.
So if you go to the slides, that it's going to be there. But I'm pretty sure. Actually, how about at the end of the lecture I can Google one right now. But we can keep going with lecture now.
Just post it on Ed.
I can post it on Ed.
Also, can you get the lights? Awesome. All right, so navigation. So what we've done so far is just having single page apps, but I assume you guys have all used apps before, and you go from one page to another. So this is a pretty important topic. And so one method that we see a lot is the idea of like pushing a controller. And so this uses a stack of controllers. So we have our main one, and then we push new ones onto it. And we can see it pushes, we have a title to organize it, so just to let you know what's going on. And then it has a back button, so you can go back down the stack and pop things off. So again, we're putting things on top or popping them off. And to do this, we use something called a navigation controller. So this is where the root view controller that we learned about last week is a little bit more important because we actually have to configure this. But so here's a diagram that Apple gives us. And so here's like a 3D stack of what your app is looking like, and it has like a background, and then it has this navigation controller with a new view controller in it. And you can see that there's this little title bar and some extra customizable things we can have. And then here's the stack that I was talking about just a second ago. And there's some other things going on here, like the toolbar, the delegate. We'll talk about delegates a little bit more next week. For now, it's really just important that you understand we have a stack of view controllers, and we have a navigation bar that's going to be at the top that's going to be letting our user know like where they are and how they can go between screens. So we're going to just jump straight into the demo here. And I have this little project going. You can download the code on the textbook if you want. And so first things first, we need to change, instead of just populating our screen with just the main controller, the main view controller as we did last week, we need to set up this navigation controller. So we're going to go back into here and into our scene delegate, and then we're going to change the root view controller of our window. So we're going to say window.root view controller, and it's better to set it up how we did last time by deleting the storyboard and setting up main, because there's going to be some extra overhead with memory. But for sake of brevity, I'm just going to ignore if there's any controller already existing, and I'm just going to make a new one. So the way that we create a navigation controller is just navigation controller and then an initializer with a root view controller. And our root view controller is just going to be this class that I made, which is a main controller. And then if we run it, hopefully we'll still see the same thing. Nothing's changed because we haven't really configured any of the properties. So it's still this very static app with 2 buttons on it. And so first thing we're going to want to do is customize the title, right? So we know where we are. And I'm just going to do this in view.load, as we would just like a normal view. And there's a property of all view controllers called title, so we can just assign this. So we can just say like controller, just keep it brief for now. And so it set our navigation header title. And I want to give these kind of like, so what the idea of the app is going to be, I'm just going to be pushing the same controller on and on and on. So I want some differentiation between them. So I'm just going to create a variable called index, which is just how far down the stack you are. Just set it to 0. And then I created this ordinal function. Which ordinal is just like, if you have like first, second, third, it's just like those 2 letters at the end. So I just created a function that takes in an integer and creates the right ordinal. So I'm just going to assign the title to be the ordinal of the index plus controller. And hopefully we'll see first controller. Yeah. And so now we need to add that idea of pushing new controllers onto the stack. So we have our push controller that links up to this push view controller function that I made earlier. And pushing is pretty easy. All you have to do is get your navigation controller. So again, the controller that's kind of managing all this. And just push view controller. I'm going to create a new main controller and animate it. And I'll show you, I guess, what it looks like to push it on animated and not animated. Hopefully it will look fine, but it can be a little funky in the simulator. So it pushes on, and then I can go back, and I can go back. But you'll notice that, again, I haven't changed this, the index at all. So that there's no differentiation, which is exactly what I created the index property for. So one way that we could do this is by creating a new init. So index is an int, and then self.index is index, and then super.init, and then call it designated initializer, and that's fine. It'll make me do this required initializer, which is kind of gross. I personally don't like this because, I don't know, I never use it. It's kind of scary. So one thing you can do is if you're just going to be calling like another initializer with basically no required setup, is you can create something called a convenience initializer, which all it does is like say, I'm going to like take some different arguments and I'm just going to pass it into the other initializer that was already created. So it's literally just for your convenience. So I'm just going to do self.init with no parameters, and then takes an index. And the reason this is nice is because I'm not creating a new initializer, so I don't have to worry about, breaking anything. So that works. And then, of course, when I create my new controller, I need to call the new initializer. So index is just going to be the index of the current one plus 1. And I'll show you what it looks like without animation. It's a little bit wonky. So I'll push a new controller, and you'll see there's no animation. It just kind of changes. It jumps to it. But we are seeing that the information is being conveyed, and I can go back. But I'm going to go back to animating this because I prefer it that way. But so that's a great way for like persistent information, because if we skip, if we push a controller or push another one, we can go back to the things that we've already did. Of course, if we pop a controller off, then we've lost it. But you could imagine, like, say I have a bunch of views, and I want to like configure it based off of user input. I might want to push up like a screen quickly to get some input and then get rid of it. I don't really care. It can be totally ephemeral. And that's where presenting controllers is. So it just kind of pushes up the controller from the bottom of the screen, and then you can interact with it, press some buttons, and maybe it will dismiss itself, or you can drag from the top of the screen and it'll go away. And this you don't actually need a navigation for controller for. You can just integrate it into any view controller. So we're going to start doing that. And I'm going to create, questions.
Yeah, so like the animations that are happening, like where is that just contained within, can I see the code again?
Yeah.
So like, is that just contained within push view controller? It's just always going to be navigating, pushing from like right to left. Is there any way to do it the opposite direction, or like instead of, I don't know, if you wanted it to be animated differently, like if you wanted it to be diagonal or something, would you be able to do that?
Yeah, you totally can. There's a lot of, like, animations is a pretty advanced topic. There's a lot more going on, and we will talk about that later.
Yeah, we do have Electron animations, but for now, no. But later on, we'll learn how to define your custom animation, and you can evoke your own animations. Yeah.
And like for the most part, this animation works. But yeah, if you do want to customize it, you totally can.
And so, if you were to use like custom animation, would you be like overriding push view controller, or would you just not be using push view controller anymore?
So you would still use push view controller if you want this behavior of like having a navigation controller, because it comes with other conveniences, right? So you have the title bar, you have like the back button and stuff like that. But when you do like push view controller, the animated field will be false, and then you like define your own animation, whether that's through UI view animate or other like functions you want to use.
Okay.
All right, so now we're going to use this present view controller, which was hooked up to this present button down here. And I believe I've already kind of started another view controller. We can ignore this. This is for the next section of lecture. But it's just a blank view controller. And so if I present this, so to do this, we just use a present function. We're going to create a new editor controller, which is what I call the other thing, and that was true. And there's a completion block, which is optional. I'm going to set it to nil. I'm going to talk about what that is a little bit later. Not so much completion blocks, but this weird typing. So if we try this out, we present an empty view controller. You'll see that it just kind of animates weirdly. And that's because that's what happens to the controller that's presenting, is it'll kind of hide itself so that the other one can be the focus. But there is actually another controller here that I can interact with. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a transparency effect, but so we're gonna fix that. So first I'm gonna create a background, which I just have some backgrounds set up, and I'll be talking about this lazy property soon, but not for right now. And then just active logo. And then I'm going to override our view did load. And so first things first, I don't like having a view.translate to false for everything, because I forget it a lot and it's annoying. So I will just use a for loop through all of my views. So for subview, and for now just background and the active logo, I'm going to say subview.translates. Set that to false, and then I'm also going to add it to the subview, or to the super view. And then this is going to be all standard. So,
Well, how are you doing that?
yeah, so if you, in Xcode, drag while clicking and holding Option, you can create multiple cursors, and they'll multi-line edit for you. You can do this in pretty much all of your editors, except the hotkey command is a little bit different. But so I have a background now, and I'm just going to set the active logo. I'm going to create a little padding variable, because I'm going to use this 15 constant quite a lot. Oh, and then of course I have to use safe area layout guide, because I forgot to do that, because I don't need it for background, but I do need it for the app dev logo, because the background I want to span the entire screen, whereas the logo I want to actually be within. And then I'm just going to make it 50 by 50. And hopefully, now we should see something actually present. Great. So we have a logo and we have a background, but obviously that's not very interesting. So I'm going to create two fields. So one we're going to rename titles, and then there's a body here that you can't see that we're going to add text for. So, and then of course I'm going to put a button at the bottom of the controller to dismiss it. So first I'm going to create a text field. so for the title. And I organize my views slightly different than Justin. He will put most things either in his viewDidLoad or in a separate function, which is totally fine. I prefer to have all of my views organized at the top, but that can be kind of annoying. So like say if I had this UI text field, like if I wanted to configure any of its properties, like there's no way for me to do this at the top level. So what I'll do is I'll create an anonymous function and then just run that. So first I have to set the type because it's not going to know what's going on. And then I'm just going to create this function. So all I have to do is create these brackets and then just call it with parentheses. And then I'm going to say that my field, UI text field, and return field. And then I can customize it. So field.placeholder is insert title. I want its font to be system font of 25. And then I want its background color, or sorry, text color to be black. And then I can do the same thing. For the body, I want it to be bigger, so I want it to be a text view. So body field, text view. And it's going to give me these errors, but they're not actually real. It just happens sometimes. So text color, I'm going to set to black again. Font, I'm going to set to 20. And I'm going to give it a background because you can't really see it. So just going to make it a gray color. Yeah. So I'm going to change this slightly. So normally I would just put in my views, but we've learned something kind of cool, which are closures here, these anonymous functions. And so with these, we can actually leverage something else, which is actually functionally the exact same as a for loop. It's just stylistically different, and I'm showing you this more so you can understand things better later. So I'm going to take this list of my views, and then I'm going to put in my title field and my body field. And I'm going to use a function called forEach. And forEach lists over an array, or iterates over an array, and has a function that you pass it, and it will apply it to every single thing in the array. So I'm going to just create a function like this. And for things that take functions as an argument, you can just ignore them and just put it outside. And then I'm going to name the thing. So well, actually, I don't have to. So anonymous functions like this will name their arguments $0, $1. It's a zero index system, stuff like that. And so I could do .translates into false. But I don't personally like this. I'd rather have a name. So you can just name it just by doing subview in. So this will name the things in order. So if I had a second one, I could do another view or something like that. I'm going to do subview. Subview. And this is the exact same. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So for each gets an array and iterates over it and applies a function to each of the elements?
Yes.
So is subview the function, or which one's the function?
The function is this, all of this between the curly brackets.
And what does subview do?
So subview, so this for each thing will iterate over the elements, right? And it will pass in an element, and then we'll do something to it. So it needs to take an argument. This function needs to take an argument, and all it does is it names that argument. So it's naming, each time it happens, background is going to be named subview, and then app dev logo is going to be named subview. It's the exact same as putting the subview here, subview in for the for loop.
I see.
Yeah. Okay, so now I have to put these in. And so title view, I'm just field is going to be at the top, so view dot top. And you'll notice that this is getting kind of tedious, putting in so many views. And we will actually be telling you how to expedite this process later. But for now, this is what's going on, sadly. Layout guide, leading, heading. We're just going to copy this. Oh, and then I want my title to actually be centered. So I'm going to do that. Text alignment center. Okay. Oh. Then I'm going to put, I have to do a bottom. So so button, I'm going to say like a dismiss button. So like if someone wants to cancel editing, I'm going to create a new button. And so if I were to create a closure how we normally would, so let button equal a UI button, return button. This is going to be fine until I start adding a target. Because if I do self and hashtag selector for inside, and then I'm just going to create a new function called update. You'll see that there's this error. Oh, that's not the right error. Oh, that's surprising. Okay, well, generally speaking, when you're accessing self at the computation at the top level, you can't actually access self because this is going to happen on initialization. So to silence errors, which I don't know why my Xcode isn't getting mad at me right now, you just create a lazy var, which basically what it does is it doesn't actually run this function until it's asked to. So that's what that does, and that's what's happening up here. I needed to, because this is actually a property of the class. It can't run this until later. So I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to set the title to be actually, I'm going to call this update. And then this is for normal. And then, of course, I have to add this to my list down here for views. And I'm going to put this at the bottom of the screen. So bottom anchor equal to bottom. I'm going to make it at the center. And I'm going to set its width anchor to be half the width. Half. And then I'm going to make it have a height of 25. Cool. And then I'm going to put, the reason I define that first is because I'm going to put body field in between those two. Okay, and that should hopefully give us the view that I want. Great. So it's presenting. This is slightly off, so I'm going to have to fix that. So body field's trailing needs to be negative. And then I'm just going to, this background we can't really see. So I'm going to say button. Background color is going to be system blue. And I'm just going to give everything a quarter radius because I like that. Okay. And this should hopefully work. But like the problem is if we were to type anything, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to update this previous controller. So first things first, I'm just going to make it dismiss once the update button is pressed. And the way that we do this, dismiss a presented controller, is just a dismiss function. I'm going to animate it, and I'm going to set the completion to nil again. So then at least when we press update, it'll set it to nil. Or it won't set it to nil, but it will dismiss itself. But then the problem is we have no way of accessing this first controller or any way of setting its properties. So the way that we're going to do this right now, which is a naive way that's going to cause us problems later, is we're just going to pass the entire main controller into the editor controller. So I'm just going to create a property called parent controller and make it a main controller. And I'm going to make it optional because I don't want to create a new initializer or anything like that. So we can just set it. So then I'm going to say when I create it, I'm going to say that my editor and the editor's parent controller is the main controller that presented it in the first place. And what that allows us to do is once we're in this update function, I can like edit the parent controller. So I can say that the title is going to be the title field's text, and then the message, which I haven't shown you yet, but hopefully you'll see it now, is going to be the body field's text. And so if I update this, I can present it. I'll say title, and I'll say body, and it updates. But there's a problem that we can see. Well, actually, first I can say, oh, if I push a thing on, it will say, oh, the title's changed, and then it persists. But the problem that I foresee is if I update it with no changes, then it just becomes like a nil title, which I personally don't want, because then if I push it, then it has an empty title, and that kind of breaks our flow of what's going on. And so there is a way to combat this, is when you have, improper data inputs. We call it data validation, and Swift creates a bunch of potential like templates that we can use to kind of let the user know, oh, what you did, we don't like it, we're gonna make sure that you fix this. And so we use UI alert controller and an alert action to show to make this little box here. So I'm going to walk you through that process, and this is why we really need closures. So first I'm going to make sure that there's a title, because I don't really care about bodies, but I'm going to make sure that the title is valid. So I'm going to create the title and say that's the title field's text, and I'm also going to say that I don't want it to be empty, because you can have an empty string that's not nil. So in either of these cases, I want to escape and make sure that we're doing something right. So I'm going to return, but first I'm actually going to show alert. So I don't remember who asked about semicolons, but here's a good use because I wanted to put them on one line. So it'll escape and none of this will be executed. And so here's the process for creating, for telling the user that there's something going wrong. So first we have to create an alert. So a UI alert controller with a title message and a preferred style. So invalid title, input a non-empty string. Obviously you'd want something better than that, but, and then for the type, I'm just going to say it's an alert. And then how we show this at the end is by presenting a view controller, because this is a view controller. So alert, I'm going to make it animated, and I'm not going to put in anything here. So if we were to run this, then it shows this alert, but there's like nothing that the user can do because we have to configure that as well. So first we have to add a text field, so something that they can put in. So the way that we do this is use our controller and add a text field. And you'll notice it uses configuration handler. So I'll explain what this type is. So this is a function. If you ever see this arrow, which is exactly like how you define your functions, right? And everything on the left of the arrow is the arguments. So it takes just a text field, and it returns void, which means that it has no return type. So we're going to need to make a function that will do this. And what's going on here is if we call add text field, there's a lot of boilerplate that's happening, but they're going to create a text field, and they're going to let us change it however we want. And that's what the idea of this configuration handler is. So I'm going to do the thing again where I just create a function after it, and it's implied to be put into it. And I'm going to name it. Name the text field, so text field in. And I'm just going to say text field dot placeholder is insert title. Ooh, that was bad spelling. Okay, so hopefully this will show up now. And it does. But now we have to have two actions. So one that's going to be a cancel and one that's going to be like, yes, let's use this. So first I'm going to use a cancel. And you'll notice I've written out the flow logic here. So if we don't want it, then we have to do something to show that we don't have any valid information. And then if we do want it, then we have to make sure that it's valid. And if it is, we can continue. And if it isn't, we invalidate the process. So we're going to be doing the same thing twice. So I'm just going to create a function to do that. So I'm going to say let invalidate is text field. Oh, not text field. I need title field dot invalidate. Okay. And to make this a function, I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to say placeholder is insert title. So this is a function that we can pass in later. Just compile. And since this is a closure, we have to use self. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to add this action now. So I'm going to just call it add action. And then we have to add something that's called a UI alert action, which will handle a lot of stuff for us. So we have to give it a title. So I'm going to say cancel. And then the type is going to be cancel. And then we need to create this handler, which will say, okay, if someone chooses to cancel, we have to make some kind of decision. And this will take in, it's supposed to give me this action itself, but I don't really care about this. So to get rid of, we have to bind this to something if we don't use it. So I'm just going to bind it to an anonymous variable, so we can just ignore it. Okay. And then I'm just going to call invalidate. And that should work. And this title field invalidate is a function I already created just to kind of expedite this process. But so if we run this, then we'll have this cancel option, and then it changes the title to red, which is that's what this invalidate function does. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Why do you have in after
Why do I have the in here? Yeah, so what's happening here is this handler that it takes has an argument for it. Like it's just built in for an argument. And if I'm not going to use an argument, I have to bind it to an anonymous thing. So I don't, or to something. That's just a quirk of Swift.
Wait, so you say so it's running the variable invalidates? Is that what it's doing?
Oh, right here?
Yeah.
So what's happening is this this alert action takes in a function. This is what it's going to execute when it's pressed. And this function takes in the alert itself. And then for the alert, for the action I'm giving it, I'm saying ignore the alert. I don't care about it. And then I want you to call invalidate. So this, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing, but for continue, which has slightly more complex logic. So I'm going to add another action, which I'll call it update. And I will say that it's default, which means it's not like something that's escaping this process. I'm going to create this handler again. And I'm going to forget the alert again. And so now I want to check that the text field has valid information. So I'm going to do another guardlet. So, and I'm going to set title, which is what we're inputting, is the alerts text field. So it has a list of text fields. And then 0, and then it's text. And this will give me an error because this text field's property is actually optional, but it doesn't really matter because I was already kind of expecting it to be optional. And then again, I want to make sure that title is not empty. Make sure, yeah, I did that. Okay. And in this case, I want to invalidate and then return. Otherwise, I want to, synchronize my data and then continue. So I'm going to change my title field, title fields, text property to be title. And then I just want to call this update function again because we're ready to move on. Yeah.
Okay. First question, can you review what the guard in front of let means?
So guard let is pretty similar to if let. So what happens is I have this optional value here, and I'm going to bind it to an identifier. And if that optional value is nil, then I just want to escape execution. I want to just get rid of like what I'm doing, and so I'm going to execute this else block. Otherwise, I'm going to assign it to this identifier, and then I'm just going to continue going on. So it's kind of like if let, except it's more of like I'm saying this is kind of a niche case, and in this niche case, I just kind of want to like escape what I'm doing, whereas if let is like very much saying, oh, nil and containing something are equal possibilities for me. I'm gonna like process both of them. I'm gonna make sure that they're both handled. You can do the exact same things with them. It's more of a stylistic thing.
And also, when you just write return at the end, what is it returning?
So this is a void function, which means it has no return value, right? So by putting return here, I'm not actually returning anything. I'm just saying that nothing else in this function has to be executed. Because if I ever have a return statement in a function, anything after that return won't be executed because I've already returned a value, so there's no point. So that's what's happening here. Is like I'm just making sure that this doesn't get executed by returning here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So now if I do this, if I try updating without a title, it'll get mad at me and it'll say this is an invalid title, and then let me say I don't put in anything. It'll go red. I'll do it again, and I'll say a title, and it'll update for me. So this completion handler is another function, and I actually want to make things a little fancy. And so once this is done dismissing, that's what this completion handler is saying. Once it's done, I'm going to call this function. Then I want it to type write something, which is basically like I just want it to like type it slowly in. So I'm going to do my parent controller dot message dot typewriter, the body field dot text. And if I don't use it as a completion handler, if I just put it before, then it'll start before I'm done, which is fine. It's just I'll miss some of the animation. Oh, I have to put self here too. So then if I put like a title and then like a really long like body, then it'll slowly type it out for me. Okay. One thing you can imagine is like, what if I want to change, like I want to put in a lot of text and then I dismiss it and then I want to change it again. Like all of my text is gone. Like what if I made a typo and I want to edit it? So like you might want your controller to persist. You might want to keep using it. So in this case, we would actually need to, instead of just presenting our controller, we would actually need to save a controller and then present it continuously. So in this case, we need to say let editor equal an editor controller. And then, of course, I need to set the parent controller again to self. And then, instead of doing this, I can just do that. Should build. Great. And so let's say I put in some text and another title. I'm just going to dismiss this. And if I present it again, it's still there, which is great. But we've actually created a pretty significant issue, which is called a memory leak. So what I'm going to do is we can actually create functions on deinitialization. So anytime that our garbage collector says that we don't need a piece, like a class or an instance of a class, it'll get rid of it and it will call this function. And so if we had it like we had before, so we were creating a new controller every time, then initialize. Then if I present a controller and then get rid of it, it deinitializes itself. Because what's going on here is there's not a single pointer in existing code to that object. So the garbage collection's like, we don't need this, let's get rid of it. But in the case where we have like a pointer to it, we might have created an issue. And sorry, the issue isn't that, like, if I just dismiss it, it doesn't go away. Because we actually do want that behavior. We want it to stay. But, like, say if I push this controller, a new controller, and then I put something to edit it, then if I get rid of this, I want it to deinitialize. Because I don't need it anymore. I don't need to edit that controller. But you'll notice that it doesn't get deinitialized. And so that's where this cycle idea comes in. And so the question is, like, how can I have this kind of persistent information? And this is where MVC gets really important, and topics like delegation, which we're going to talk about next week. But so what is MVC? And MVC is a like an organization paradigm that's commonly used in industry. There's other types. There's like model, view, item, or something like that. But this is what's seen most often, and this is what we've taught you last time. So there's three main components to the MVC: model, views, and controllers. And so our model is our data. This is like the most important thing that we can have. It's like we need to protect this with all we can. Like the user can change it, but we want to make sure that the changes are as predictable as possible. So the way that we handle this is by using a controller to interface between the user, so the views, which is what the user is going to interact with, and then the model. So there's no communication between views and models. And so what we tried to do just now was communicate through controllers. So we had like a controller here and a controller here, and we had a cycle going between them. Whereas we want it to be more of like a unidirectional thing. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. But so that's the end of this lecture. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.